Do you think you've truly been loved?
No.
No. And do you think you really have experienced loving someone?
Yes.
You have.
So Cassie's story is Kim's story.
We all know Jennifer Lopez as the ultimate comeback queen. Every setback became a triumph. Every heartbreak turned into a hit. Every public stumble transformed into a stepping stone. But there's one chapter of her life that's never fully closed. One name that still makes her inner circle tense. One relationship so explosive it's rarely addressed directly, even decades later. And it's not just a love story gone wrong. It's a collision of fame, power, ambition, and timing. One that shaped both careers in ways the public still doesn't fully understand. As renewed scrutiny and unanswered questions swirl around the past, that era is being looked at again, not for gossip but for context. Because when you connect the dots, the story of J-Lo and Diddy isn't just about romance. It's about an industry moment that changed everything.
We haven't seen the indictments yet. There's been some time lag. I suppose it will take some time to go through all the forensic, evidence.
Let's start with the raw truth. Jennifer Lopez has acknowledged, in her own words, that her relationship with Sean Diddy Combs left a lasting mark on her. Not in a tell-all memoir, not in a single explosive interview, but in fragments, carefully chosen sound bites over the years, hints dropped in magazines, a pause here, a deflection there. She described that time as emotionally exhausting, scary, tempestuous, a period when she felt unmoored and overwhelmed. Yet unlike others who have since come forward with formal complaints and courtroom testimony, Lopez has never filed one. She's never sat down for a fully unfiltered account of what really happened behind closed doors. And that's the question that makes people lean in. Why? Because the way she's framed it, she wasn't simply a bystander. She was immersed in a world she's admitted nearly broke her, a world she chose to stay in longer than she should have. The timeline is clear. They met in 1997 when Lopez appeared in his Been Around the World video. By 1999, they were hip-hop royalty, and it couple dominating red carpets, headlines, and pop culture. Power, glamour, visibility. Then came the night that changed everything. The Manhattan nightclub shooting. Chaos. Sirens. Lopez and Combs leaving the scene. A firearm later found in their vehicle. Hours in police custody while the world watched in real time. Charges against her were ultimately dropped, but the damage was done. That moment wasn't just a scandal. It was a test of loyalty, of proximity to power, of how far she was willing to go to stand by him. And for a time she did. She stayed. Through the 3M arguments, through the volatility, through the emotional whiplash she would later describe as leaving her crying, unraveling, going nuts. She said she cared deeply for him, but also that the relationship pulled her into a version of herself she barely recognized. So when the reckoning finally arrived, when the past began catching up with the present, Jennifer Lopez made a choice. She stayed on the sidelines, and the question remains, is that silence about fear, self-preservation, or something she still isn't ready to name?
Civil case is a much lower standard of a preponderance of the evidence, or in more layman's terms, more likely than not, the measurement we as attorneys typically use for that is 51%. And so for a civil case, you're just saying, hey, is there a 51% chance that Sean Combs allegedly committed these acts? If so, he would be liable. In the federal case, which was criminal, that was proof beyond a reasonable doubt, where he was found guilty of those two counts we mentioned earlier and is serving a 50-month sentence.
Here's where the story gets messy, because while Jennifer Lopez has often framed herself as a survivor of a volatile era, some of the men from her past tell a far more complicated story. Her first husband, Ajani Noah, has been the most outspoken, sometimes painfully so. He's accused Lopez of cheating on him with Diddy, of lying under oath during their legal disputes, and of using her celebrity and influence to damage his reputation. In a scathing Instagram post in December 2024, Noah claimed their marriage collapsed as her relationship with Diddy was already taking shape, saying the divorce in 1999 flowed directly into her very public romance with Combs. He has also alleged the existence of a private tape from the early 2000s. Those claims, however, have been denied in court, and Noah's credibility has repeatedly been called into question. That reminder is crucial. Allegations are not evidence. Still, he isn't the only former partner to suggest turbulence. Mark Anthony, her second husband, was reportedly strained by the lingering shadow of her past with Diddy. Chris Judd, her third, has hinted at emotional volatility following their breakup. So the question lingers, uncomfortable but unavoidable. Was Jennifer Lopez purely a victim of a damaging relationship, or a master of narrative control, revealing just enough pain while keeping the most complicated truths carefully out of frame?
I want to be there when I'm having my big important moments on the red carpet. I want someone to be there, when I'm doing whatever, or when we're going to the store, whatever it is. Like, I wanted to share that. And so I didn't hide from it, and I spoke about it. And I think now, after what's happened in the past few years to me and to my children, I just feel like I want to keep that heart so much more quiet in my life.
And then there's the Cassie parallel, the elephant in the room that no one wants to address directly. Cassie Ventura's lawsuit against Diddy is stark in its allegations: coercion, control, fear, and a life shaped by his power. She describes being pressured into situations she didn't choose, carrying out tasks to keep the peace, and living under the constant threat of retaliation. What makes the comparison unavoidable is that parts of this dynamic sound familiar. Jennifer Lopez has spoken, cautiously, about emotional exhaustion, fear, and the way Diddy's world consumed her sense of self. The difference is that Lopez got out early. She didn't just leave, she rebuilt. Her career soared. Her image hardened into something untouchable. So the question isn't simply why she left, it's why she won't speak now. Is it self-preservation, lingering fear, or something more complicated? An acknowledgement that in the late 90s and early 2000s, she wasn't only surviving that world, but navigating it, benefiting from it, and understanding its unspoken rules. That brings us to the parties, the now infamous Hamptons gatherings, the after-hours scenes that multiple lawsuits and witnesses have since described as environments where boundaries blurred and power dynamics ruled. Former attendees and security personnel have spoken broadly about excess and unpredictability. Even Usher, who lived with Diddy as a teenager, later described the environment as wild and disorienting. In a 2016 Howard Stern interview, he recalled seeing things he didn't fully understand: rooms, encounters, moments where you never knew what was going to happen. This was the same social orbit Lopez occupied at the height of her relationship with Diddy. She's never publicly confirmed attending those gatherings, though photographs place her within that scene. Coincidence, or a calculated silence meant to keep certain chapters permanently closed? Because sometimes survival also means never looking back, no matter how many questions remain.
Morning, Michael. At this point, we've all probably heard about these infamous parties. Diddy's assistant now giving us details about what he says were called Wild King Nights.
Now fast forward to the present. Diddy is facing a federal indictment, charges that include racketeering and human trafficking, allegations serious enough to dismantle an empire built over decades. His properties have been raided. Former associates are under scrutiny. The public reckoning is no longer hypothetical. And yet Jennifer Lopez, the woman who once called him the love of her life, has remained completely silent. No statement, no interview, not even a carefully measured social media response. In October 2024, when fans pressed her for comment during an autograph signing, she didn't deflect or deny. She simply walked away. Silence, of course, isn't guilt, but it isn't neutral either. It's a choice. And in moments like this, silence often signals not ignorance, but complexity, a past that doesn't fit cleanly into headlines, a truth that may be far messier than any single narrative allows.
New audio from the Diddy trial, and it is pretty explosive. This is audio of a voicemail that Diddy left to the Jane Doe who's been testifying in this trial for the last couple days. And he sounds really annoyed. He's talking about her maybe giving him the silent treatment, and his response is, I got a busy life, I can't be dealing with your silent treatment.
And this is where the plot thickens. While Jennifer Lopez remains silent, the legal pressure around Diddy continues to mount, and her name keeps appearing in unexpected ways. In one lawsuit filed by a former associate alleging assault in the late 1990s, Lopez has been listed by attorneys as a potential witness, not accused of wrongdoing, but cited because of her proximity to Diddy during that period and her possible insight into his behavior at the time. Then there's the resurfaced 2002 Diane Sawyer interview. Asked directly whether she was afraid of him, Lopez hesitated, nervous laughter, eyes averted, a carefully worded response that stopped short of a denial. For years, fans called it awkward. Now, viewed through a legal lens, that hesitation reads less like discomfort and more like restraint.
U.S. attorney, what you want you want the best attorneys you can have in there, and it really, I know you want to, like we said, appearances matter, but you want to win this case, and you need, like you said.
So let's connect the dots carefully. Jennifer Lopez has described her relationship with Diddy as scary. She's acknowledged feeling emotionally drained, destabilized, consumed by his world. She's hinted at control, infidelity, and a dynamic that left her questioning her own reality. And yet, unlike Cassie Ventura and others who have since gone on record, Lopez never has. Why? One theory is that her silence isn't driven solely by fear, but by survival. Not just survival from Diddy, but from what full honesty might cost her. Because admitting everything wouldn't only implicate him, it could complicate her own carefully constructed legacy. In the late 90s and early 2000s, Jennifer Lopez wasn't a peripheral figure. She was deeply embedded in his orbit, professionally, socially, creatively. She was present during the scandals, the lawsuits, the nights when rumors hardened into headlines. That proximity doesn't equal guilt, but it does mean awareness. If the allegations now facing Diddy reflect a broader pattern of coercion and abuse, then Lopez wasn't just adjacent to that world. She was inside it, witness to it, navigating it. And that reality reality collides head-on with the image she spent decades cultivating, the empowered icon, the symbol of resilience, the woman who always rises above. Some stories aren't buried because they're false. They're buried because they don't fit the narrative that survived.
How to collect everybody's phone. So now it's just your word against a billionaire. You're gonna lose. Read this right there from that young.
Now let's talk about the exes, because if we're trying to understand Jennifer Lopez's silence, we can't ignore the men who have publicly challenged her version of events. Her first husband, Johnny Noah, has been the loudest and most relentless. Over the years, he's accused Lopez of dishonesty, manipulation, and using her power to silence him. He's claimed she tried to ruin his reputation and portrayed herself one way in public while acting very differently in private. Courts have repeatedly rejected parts of his narrative, and his credibility has been questioned, but his persistence has kept the conversation alive. He's not the only one to suggest unresolved tension. Mark Anthony, her second husband, was reportedly frustrated by the long shadow cast by her past with Diddy, a relationship that seemed to linger emotionally and publicly well into their marriage. Chris Judd, too, has hinted at emotional turbulence following their split, though he's spoken far more cautiously. Even Ben Affleck has been pulled into the discourse. A resurfaced 2014 interview shows Lopez joking that she'd let both Diddy and Affleck drown when asked who she'd save from a sinking raft. It was delivered as humor, but jokes like that often carry residue. They tend to surface from unresolved history, from complicated feelings that never fully settled. And perhaps that's the real thread connecting all of this. The history isn't just about Diddy. It's about the version of Jennifer Lopez that existed during that era, the woman she spent decades reshaping, refining, and distancing herself from. So where does that leave her now, caught between two impossible choices? If she speaks out, she risks reopening chapters that could complicate her legacy and raise uncomfortable questions about her proximity to a world she now stands apart from. If she stays silent, she risks appearing evasive, or worse, complicit in the eyes of the public. The pressure is building. Fans are demanding clarity. Legal commentators are openly speculating about whether she could be called to testify. Every day without a statement intensifies the scrutiny, but there's a larger truth here. Lopez may not only be protecting herself, she may be protecting an industry, because if she confirms even a fraction of what's been alleged, the fallout wouldn't stop with one man. It would ripple outward, forcing Hollywood to confront a culture of silence many powerful people benefited from, and that may be the reckoning no one, not even Jennifer Lopez, is ready to trigger.
And what's really going to be interesting is the parade of celebrities who we expect to be mentioned and or called into that courtroom. You know, people who we hadn't heard about prior, like Mike Myers, you know, Austin Powers, Mike Myers. Why is he getting called? Why is he on the witness list? That'll be fascinating. And then, of course, there are the no-name, quote unquote, women who are going to have to find every ounce of courage they have.
Let's talk about the parties again, because the more you examine them, the clearer it becomes that this story isn't only about Jennifer Lopez and Diddy. It's about an entire era. The late 90s and early 2000s scene, Hampton's white parties, exclusive after-hours clubs, private gatherings that multiple lawsuits now describe as spaces where power imbalances thrived and boundaries were often blurred. Former attendees and members of security teams have spoken generally about excess and unpredictability. Even Usher, who lived with Diddy as a teenager, later characterized that environment as wild and disorienting. In a 2016 interview with Howard Stern, he said he witnessed things he didn't fully understand, walking into rooms where you never quite knew what you were about to see. His comments weren't accusations, but they painted a picture of chaos normalized by fame and access. This was the same social orbit Jennifer Lopez occupied during her relationship with Diddy. She has never publicly confirmed attending those private gatherings, but photographs and public appearances place her firmly within that world. Resurfaced images from the 2000 VMAs show a tense confrontation between the two at a nightclub, images that years later have been re-examined alongside other unrelated allegations tied to that time period. Whether those connections are meaningful or merely coincidental remains unproven, but the silence surrounding them has fueled ongoing speculation. Then there's the recurring allegation raised by her first husband, Johnny Noah, who has claimed that footage from the early 2000s exists. Courts have rejected those claims, and no such material has ever been verified. Still, the allegation persists, not as proof, but as a symbol, because if anything like that existed, the implications wouldn't stop with Lopez. It would raise questions about who else was present, who else benefited, and who else chose silence. And that's the Pandora's box Hollywood has spent decades trying not to open.
There are a lot of lawyers who call this legal extortion, and that this is the way the legal system works, which is you threaten somebody with reputational harm. And in this case, it's interesting that Jay-Z, who's very wealthy, said it would be financial ruin.
Let's bring this back to the present. Diddy is facing serious federal charges, with a high-profile trial expected in 2025. The allegations continue to mount, and Jennifer Lopez, the woman who built her brand on authenticity, resilience, and living your truth, has chosen silence. Silence, of course, isn't neutrality, it's a decision. And in moments like this, that decision speaks loudly. To understand why, you have to go back to December 27, 1999. Club New York, gunfire erupts, panic follows. Diddy and Lopez leave the scene and are later detained after a firearm is discovered in their vehicle. Lopez is released without charges, but the incident becomes a defining rupture in her public life. In later interviews, she's described that night as terrifying, a wake-up call about the danger surrounding Diddy's lifestyle. But some questions have never been fully addressed. What did she witness? What did she understand in real time? In subsequent lawsuits, allegations emerged claiming Diddy bragged about his role in the shooting and suggested Lopez had been asked to carry the weapon. Those claims remain allegations, not proven facts, but they complicate the narrative, because if even part of that were true, the story shifts. It becomes less about innocence and more about proximity, about the gray area between victimhood and survival, inside a world where saying no wasn't always simple. And that gray area may explain why Jennifer Lopez still hasn't spoken.
In the unit that was one floor above mine, so in terms of like the setting, it's a fairly decent chance that the room I'm describing is similar to where Diddy is. Yeah.
And that leads us to the most uncomfortable question of all. If Jennifer Lopez was truly as traumatized as she suggested, why didn't she leave sooner? Why remain for nearly 2 years marked by emotional exhaustion, public scrutiny, and instability she later described as overwhelming? Why endure a relationship she hinted left her feeling diminished and disrespected? The answer may lie in power, because Diddy wasn't just her partner, he was a gatekeeper, a mentor, a collaborator, a force with enormous influence in music, nightlife, and media at a moment when Lopez was still fighting to secure her place. In an industry where loyalty is currency and women are often punished for walking away, leaving isn't always just an emotional decision. Sometimes it's a professional risk. Sometimes it's about survival. That's what makes this story larger than tabloid drama. It lives in the gray space between victimhood and agency, between truth and self-preservation. Jennifer Lopez has built an empire on resilience and authenticity, but this chapter challenges the limits of that narrative, because silence has a cost, especially when your voice could reshape how an era is understood. As lawsuits continue and trials approach, the one person positioned to connect past and present is choosing not to speak. And maybe that choice, more than anything else, is what keeps this story unresolved. So we ask you, is Jennifer Lopez protecting herself, or is there more behind her silence than we're ready to confront? In Hollywood, the truth is rarely black and white, and the quietest voices often carry the heaviest weight.